Hi, so today in this class, which is the first part of my grammar course, we're going to be looking at something which everybody should have seen before, and that is the present simple tense. The present simple tense usually is taught, of course, to beginners. So let's begin by looking at the structure of the present simple tense. How do you form the present simple tense? And first of all, we have the statement form, which is very easy. All we need to form the present simple tense is the subject, which could be I, you, we, they, he, she, or it, and the verb. Now, if the subject is I, you, we, or they, all we need to do is just use the base form of the verb. For example, I live, I like, I play, I have, I go. You live, you like, you play, you have, you go. We live, we like, we play, we have, we go. And they live, they like, they play, they have, they go. So when the subject is the first person singular, the second person singular or plural, which is you, the first person plural, which is we, or the third person plural, which is they, we just use the subject plus the base verb. But if the subject is the third person singular, that is a he, a she, or an it, we need to use the third person singular form of the verb, which in most verbs is formed by adding an s to the end of the verb. So, for example, live becomes lives, like becomes likes, play becomes plays, have becomes has, and go becomes goes. So we say he lives, he likes, he plays, he has, and he goes. Or she lives, she likes, she plays, she has, she goes. Or it lives, it likes, it plays, it has, it goes. Notice that the last two here do not follow the rule of just adding s, and that is because there are some exceptions to the rules for spelling. And here I have in this section here written down the rules. Third person singular verb form spelling. Add est to most verbs. For example, run becomes runs. This is what we saw here with lives, likes, and plays. We're just adding an s to the base form of the verb. But add es after the letters O, sh, double s, ch, or x. For example, do becomes does. The third person singular form of do is does. Wish ends in an sh, becomes wishes. Kiss, which ends in double s, becomes kisses. Teach, which ends in ch, becomes teaches. And fix, which ends in an x, becomes fixes. I think we saw here too with go, which ends in an o, becomes goes. Another rule: change the y to ies when a verb ends in a consonant plus a y. For example, fly, which ends in ly, which L is a consonant, becomes flies. change the Y to an I and add ES. Another example is deny, which becomes denies. Ends in a consonant Y. We change the Y to an I and add ES. But remember, if the word ends in a vowel plus Y, we just add S. We don't need to change the Y to an I. It's only when it ends in a consonant plus Y that we change the Y to an I. Here we see enjoy becomes enjoys. Finally, the verb have is irregular. We saw up here the third person of have is has. Incidentally, if you don't understand any words that I'm using here, for example, if you don't know what deny means, it's probably a very good idea just to pause the video just for a few seconds while you check that word on Google. Just Google it on your smartphone or Google it on your computer, just to get the definition. A very good dictionary to use is the Cambridge Learner's Dictionary, and I'll put a link to that below in the description of this video. So this is how we make the statement in the present simple tense. Here we have some examples. I live in Brighton. Here the subject is I, it's the first person singular, so we just need to use the base form of the verb. Brighton, if you don't know, is a city in the south of England. He lives in London. Here the subject is he, it's a third person singular, so we need to change the verb to the S form. We need to add S to the end. This is the correct verb form for the third person singular. Here we have Mike and John play football. Here the subject is two people, so it's third person plural, it's a they. So once again we're just using the base form of the verb. Mike and John play football. Incidentally, football in the United States is called soccer, and when they talk about football in the United States, they are talking about American football. Nicole plays tennis. Here Nicole is a she, it's third person singular, so we need to change the verb to the S form. Okay, very good. Let's continue with the present simple negative. How do we form the negative of the present simple? To form the negative of the present simple, we need to use first of all the subject, and we need to follow that with the auxiliary verb do if the subject is an I, a you, a we, or a they, or the auxiliary verb does if the subject is third person singular, he, she, or it, and we need to follow that auxiliary verb with not. And finally we have the main verb in the base form. So we say I do not work, you do not work, we do not work, they do not work. And in the third person singular we need to say he does not work, she does not work, or it does not work. So if it's a he, or she, or an it, we need to use does not. Notice, very important, that we are not using the S form here. With the he, she, or it, it's she does not work. We don't say she does not works. Remember, in the statement form we need to use the S form of the verb for he, she, or it. But here in the negative we don't use it because the third person singular form of the verb is in the does. We are changing the auxiliary from do to does, not the main verb. Now before we continue, it's very important to look at these contractions, because native speakers, when we speak, we do not normally use the full form, as I just did. We normally say, I don't work, or you don't work, we don't work, they don't work. We contract the do and the not. If you've been studying English for some time, you'll know that there are many contractions in English, and these are nearly always used in informal speech. This applies to all the contractions. If you're writing an email, if it's an informal email, you can use them too. And the contraction of does not is doesn't. So you should always try and use these contractions if you want to sound more like a native. We're really not going to use the full form in speech unless we want to emphasize something. Normally it's contractions. I don't work, you don't work, we don't work, they don't work, or he doesn't work, she doesn't work, it doesn't work. So let's continue with the question form. In the question form, it's also necessary to use the auxiliary verbs do or does. And this is the order of the words. First of all, we need to use the question word, if there is one, because sometimes we have a yes or no question. Like this one here, do you like coffee? In which case there is no question word because the answer is yes or no. But if there is a question word, it needs to come first. And it is followed by the auxiliary do or does. And then we have the subject, I, you, we, or they. Go with do. And as we saw before in the negative, he, she, it goes with does. And then finally, we have the main verb. You could possibly have another complement here. So this is how you form questions in the present simple. Where do you live? Where do they live? Or where does he, she, or it live? Here we have another example of a question. This is a yes or no question. Do you like coffee? And normally in English, when we have yes or no questions, we need to use what we call short answers. And the short answer in this case is like this: yes, I do, or no, I don't. We're actually using the auxiliary verb in the answer. Notice here too, where does he live? We are not using the S form. The same with the negative. The third person singular is represented here with the does. So just to finish this slide, underneath here I have some more examples, some negatives. I don't speak Chinese. He doesn't speak Chinese. Notice the difference here. Here we're using don't and here doesn't. Does he like coffee? Yes, he does. No, he doesn't. Another short answer. A yes or no question with a short answer. Another question here, what do you do? What do you do? In English, when we say what do you do, first of all, the do here is an auxiliary verb and the do here is a main verb. Secondly, this question actually is asking you about your job. If you ask me, Richard, what do you do? I can reply, I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. It's asking you about your profession. And finally here I have one more example, which is a statement. The bank's open at 9 a.m. The bank opens at 9 a.m. Notice the difference here. The verb is without the S. That's because the subject is banks, which is a plural, which is a they. And this one here, the bank, this is a singular. The bank opens at 9 a.m. So because it's singular, third person singular, it's an it. We need to use the S form of the verb. Okay, very good. Let's continue. So before we continue looking at some of the uses of the present simple tense, I just wanted to remind you that the verb be is an exception to the other verbs. It's different. The verb be, unlike the other verbs, doesn't have just two forms. It has three forms. So the three forms of the verb be is when the subject is I, when the subject is the first person singular, we need to use am. Am is the present simple form of the verb be for the first person singular when the subject is I. And this has its contraction I'm. When the subject is the third person singular, he, she or it, we need to use is. Is the correct form of the verb be in the present simple when the subject is third person singular. This too has its contractions, and as I mentioned earlier, you should always try and use the contractions because native speakers will nearly always use contractions in normal speech. And the contractions here are he's, she's, or it's. We're just contracting the is to a s, he's. Finally, when the subject is we, you, or they, we need to use are. Are is the correct form of the verb be in the present simple. And as in the previous examples, this too is contracted to we're, your, or their. Before we continue with the questions and the negatives, let's just have a look at some examples. I'm cold. This is common in English to use the verb be in the present simple tense with an adjective to express a state. For example, I'm cold, I'm hot, I'm hungry, I'm angry. Here's another example. Maria's hungry. Notice here we are using the contraction with the name Maria. We can do that too. It doesn't have to be with the subject pronoun. We can contract the verb be to the name of the person. Maria's hungry. Another example of that is John's a teacher. They're Russian, using the verb be to talk about somebody's nationality. The dog's in the garden. Here we're contracting the verb be with the noun dog. The dog's in the garden. This is what you are going to hear. Okay, so let's continue here with the negative, the present simple tense, negative with the verb be. And it's very simple. When we want to form the negative, all we need to do is add the word not after the verb be. So it's subject plus verb be plus not. I am not. He is not. She is not. It is not. We are not. You are not. They are not. However, once again, we use contractions. So instead of saying I am not, we say I'm not. Instead of saying he is not, or she is not, or it is not, we say he's not or he isn't. We've actually got two choices. We can either contract the subject and the verb be, or we can contract the verb be and the word not. It doesn't matter what you use. You can say he's not or he isn't. It doesn't matter. It's the same. Use whichever one you find easiest. And when the subject is we, you, or they, we can either contract the subject and are and say you're not, or we're not, or they're not, or we can contract the verb be and not and say we aren't, you aren't, or they aren't. Just before we continue, well, a couple of things here. First of all, this is Queen Victoria, and she was very famous for saying we are not amused. So if you want to sound like Queen Victoria from the 19th century, don't use the contractions. Also, ain't. Ain't is an interesting word because ain't is the contraction of am and not. which I didn't put here. And the reason for that is this: ain't, which was originally the contraction of am not, is now used by some native speakers to indicate is not, are not, have not, has not. For example, I ain't cold. He ain't nice. I ain't got any money. He ain't got a car. Learners should not use ain't, as its use is often associated with a low educational level. Many native speakers will use ain't in some situations. Possibly it's okay, but the problem is, as I've stated here, it has come to mean so many things. Unless you really have a very good understanding of English, then it's best to avoid using that word, but you will hear it. And when you hear it, you have to look at the context to understand what the speaker is actually saying. You'll probably hear it very often in songs and things like that, in very informal English. I've said at the bottom there that it's associated with a low educational level. It's not always the case, but as I've said, it's best to avoid the use of that word unless you have a really good understanding of English. So before we continue, we have some more examples here of the present simple tense with the verb be. John's not hungry, or John isn't hungry. It's the same. Here we're contracting John with the verb be, and here we're contracting the verb be with not. They're not Russian. They aren't Russian. It's the same. And finally, I'm not thirsty. Okay, finally, the verb be. Let's look at the question form of the verb be, and the question form of the verb be is very easy. First of all, we have a question word. Secondly, we have the verb be in the correct form. And finally, we have the subject. Of course, sometimes there is no question word because it's a yes or no question. And here I have an example of a yes or no question. Are you cold? And once again, the short answers, this time the short answer is yes, I am, or no, I'm not. Where am I? Where is he? Where is she? Where is it? Where are you? Where are we? Where are they? Here we have another example. How old is Sarah? I'm asking, when we say how old, we're asking about Sarah's age. Are they happy? Yes, they are. No, they're not. No, they aren't. Short answers, we have three choices. This is a yes or no question again. Very good. So that's a summary of the verb be, which is different from the other verbs. We don't use do, which is different from the other verbs. It has three forms in the present simple. We don't use the auxiliary doing negative. So let's continue with the main uses of the present simple tense. And the principal use of the present simple tense is to talk about general truths, facts or things true now. So here I have some examples. I'm English. It's a fact. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Again, it's a fact. Incidentally, I say centigrade, probably because I'm older. Most younger people say Celsius. It's the same, 100 degrees centigrade or Celsius. And if you're in the United States, you're more likely to see this, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, because they don't actually use the metric system for temperatures or for anything else in the United States. In Britain, when I was a child, we also didn't use the metric system, but most things now in Britain, in the United Kingdom, have changed. So let's continue with the examples up here. It snows a lot in Canada. Another example of a general truth or fact. My mother comes from Ireland. It's a fact. Mark's 24 years old. Notice here we're using the verb be contracted with Mark. It's a thing that is true now. It's currently true. China isn't in Europe. It's a fact. Mark doesn't drink. It's a fact. How old are you? It's a question about something which is true now. And where do you live? Is also a question about something which is true now. So this is the main use of the present simple tense, to talk about general truths, facts, or things that are true now. Another use of the present simple tense is to talk about fixed arrangements in the future. When I say fixed arrangements, what I mean is things that are scheduled on a timetable. For example, flights. My flight leaves at 10 p.m. It's a scheduled flight. It's programmed. Or I go back to university next week. In both of these examples, 10 p.m. and next week are in the future, but I'm not using a future tense. I'm using the present simple tense because these are scheduled, programmed, fixed arrangements. Another very important use of the present simple tense is to talk about habits, routines, or repeated actions, things that occur on a regular basis every day, every week. And we often use the present simple with the adverbs of frequency. And here there are others, but here I have the main adverbs of frequency: never, hardly ever, occasionally, sometimes, often, usually, and always. So these adverbs indicate how frequently you do something. If you say always, it means you do it 100% of the time. And if you say never, it means you never do it. You do it 0% of the time. And the other ones are spread out in between. So sometimes maybe it would be 50%, although it's not precise. And here I have some examples of talking about habits and routines or repeated actions with these adverbs of frequency. He usually drives to work. I never drink alcohol. They always go to Spain on holiday. Notice that when we say holiday in the United Kingdom, in the US they say vacation. British English, American English. John is never late. Here we have a question with an adverb of frequency. How often do you go to the cinema? If we say how often, we're asking somebody about the frequency that they do something. And we're using the present simple question form. And the answer, I go to the cinema every day. Every day, 3 times a week, once a month, twice a year. Those are other expressions of frequency that we can use with the present simple tense. Here we have another example. I go running every morning, every day, every morning, every year. Expressions of frequency that we can use with the present simple tense. Do you smoke? Asking about someone's habit. Georgina hardly ever eats fruit. It's a habit. The banks don't open on Sunday. All of these are examples of habits, routines, or repeated actions. So the present simple tense, these are the main uses: general truths, facts, things that are true now, habits, routines, repeated actions, or fixed arrangements in the future. Before we continue, let's just have a look at these here again and notice the position of the adverbs of frequency. He usually drives. We see the usually is the adverb of frequency, comes before the main verb. And it's the same in this example here. I never drink alcohol. The adverb of frequency comes before the main verb. This example here is the same. They always go. Always, adverb of frequency. Go, main verb. John is never late. If you're paying attention, you'll notice this time the adverb of frequency is after the main verb. And the reason for that is because adverbs of frequency normally go before the main verb. For example, I usually get up at 6 a.m. Usually plus main verb. I don't usually get up before 5 a.m. This is a negative, but again the usually is before the main verb. What time do you usually get up? A question. Once again, the usually goes before the main verb. However, with the verb be, he is usually late. He isn't usually late. Is he usually late? Here the verb is the verb be, and the adverb of frequency comes after the verb be. John is never, verb be, adverb of frequency. So the usual position of the adverb of frequency is before the main verb, with the exception that if the main verb is the verb be, the adverb of frequency usually goes after the main verb. Sometimes can go at the beginning of the sentence. Sometimes I get up at 8 a.m. Sometimes he's late. I sometimes get up at 8 a.m. is also okay. It can go like the others before the main verb, but you also have the option with sometimes of putting it before the rest of the clause or the sentence. Okay, before we continue, and the last thing that I want to look at is object or subject questions. On the previous screen, we saw that when you ask a question, for example, this question here, do you smoke? We need to use the auxiliary do. But this only applies when we are asking about the object. What do I mean by that? Well, most questions in English are object questions that ask about the object and use the auxiliary do in the present simple. Here's an example here. Who do you live with? And the answer is, I live with my family. In this answer, I live with my family, we have a subject. The subject is the person or the thing performing the action of the verb. In this case, it's I am the subject, and I live with my family, and my family is the object. They are receiving the action of the verb, if you like. In this sentence, we have a preposition first. But this question is the normal type of question. Most questions are like this. And we are asking this word here, which is an interrogative pronoun, or we just call it a question word sometimes, is asking about the object. Who do you live with? I live with my family. This who refers to my family. But occasionally, in some questions, we ask about the subject, and in this case, do not use do. Let's look at the example. Who lives with you? My family lives with me. Here, the who refers to the subject. We've got a few more examples here. Who likes pizza? Sam likes pizza. We are asking about the subject of the answer. Who wants to learn English? We want to. Again, we're asking about the subject, the thing or the person or the people that are performing the action. Most of this type of question is going to be with who, but occasionally you could see a subject question like this with what. For example, what causes cancer? Smoking causes cancer. I'm asking about the smoking. So just remember that most questions are actually object questions. They are about the object. So in most cases you're going to be using the auxiliary verb do, and that is why at beginner level you're only really taught this form. This other form is taught at intermediate level, probably B1 or B2 level and above. Okay, very good. That brings me to the end of the first section of my English grammar course. In the next class we will be looking at the present continuous tense. After that I will compare the present simple with the present continuous, and also I will have some exercises so that you can practice these two tenses. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope that you've learned something. Goodbye for now.